Welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Declaration International, the leading global organization defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. Happy International Women's History Month. Many of us have been active feminists since the 1970s or even the 1960s. Our analysis of gender identity ideology has been consistent since Janice Raymond's The Transsexual Empire in 1979. So we were not surprised when this new attack on women came along, and we have not changed our analysis. In 2018, we wrote a declaration on women's sex-based rights, which lays out our position and has been signed by over 39,000 people from 160 countries and is supported by 543 organizations. It's a great document and well worth reading and signing if you agree. To promote the Declaration and sex-based rights for women, we have volunteer activists, including country contacts from every continent. Please join us. You can also become a member of WDI to help our work by volunteering or donating. You can email info@womensdeclaration.com or find your country contact on our website, which is womensdeclaration.com. Our program today will begin with Emma Jones. Emma is a New York-based writer and filmmaker whose work has always centered around women's struggles, particularly around objectification, both for young women and older women who have aged out of the spotlight. Working in the film industry for almost a decade, including during Me Too, Emma has witnessed the effect pornography has had on our culture, as well as has slowly seeped into all of our entertainment and normalized the dehumanization of women for men's pleasure. In 2024, she decided to join the fight and found WDI, who had recently started an anti-pornography working group, and she'll be talking about the recent work of the anti-pornography working group today. Then we will be joined by Kate Harris. Kate is a lifelong feminist and lesbian campaigner. She worked at Brighton Women's Center and then Brighton Women's Aid, a refuge for women fleeing domestic abuse in the 1970s, and continued her activism when she moved into the corporate sector, working at American Express. Kate was an active supporter of Europe's largest gay rights organization, Stonewall. She organized Amex sponsorship for major Stonewall events and served in a personal capacity as a Stonewall ambassador, encouraging others to become involved. In April 2019, Kate was introduced to Bev Jackson, and 6 months later, they founded the LGB Alliance at a secret meeting, and the organization was granted charitable status in April 2021. And finally, we will hear from Brew. Jo is the coordinator of Women's Declaration International and writes a Substack called Radical Feminist Essays. She coordinated Shocking Pink magazine in the 1980s and lobbied the EU on feminist economics in the 1990s. And she will be talking about, quote, Who's in Love with Gender, a review of Judith Butler's new book, Who's Afraid of Gender? So welcome to all of our great panelists. And with that, I will turn it over to Emma.
In an effort to bring light to the hugely negative impact that pornography has had on our culture and the urgency to fix it, WDI USA's Anti-Pornography Working Group has created an anonymous survey to gather women's stories of all ages and backgrounds. While we are focused on legislation in the US, we urge women of all nations to share their stories, as we hope these stories will be able to change minds worldwide and to help them pass anti-porn legislation in their respective countries. From our anti-pornography mission statement, women and girls have the right to participate in society without the consequences of being in a society corrupted by pornography-induced desensitization. Article 8 of the Declaration emphasizes the need for the elimination of violence against women, noting that violence against women is one of the crucial social mechanisms by which women as a sex are forced into a subordinate position compared with men as a sex. Exposure to pornography-fueled violence and harassment directly undermines women and girls' ability to engage fully and equally in civic and social life. It leads to the assumption and conclusion that girls' and women's bodies are always for sale. Furthermore, pornography, which frequently portrays women as victims in violent and degrading scenarios, normalizes and perpetuates violence against women, thereby fueling the demand for prostituted and trafficked women and girls. This cycle of violence and exploitation underscores the urgent need to address pornography, prostitution, and sex trafficking as an interconnected issues that violate women's fundamental human rights. The Declaration calls for the collection of sex disaggregated data on violence against women, which is essential for understanding the full scope of the harm caused by pornography, prostitution, and sex trafficking. So we released the survey last Saturday on March 8th, and we have already gotten over 50 responses spanning all age groups, mostly from the US and Canada, but a few other countries. I would like to share a few excerpts. This is from a woman from the US, age group 55 to 64. The therapist I was seeing at the time encouraged me to make porn, suggesting I was like a social worker as I filmed myself performing the various requests that were made. He congratulated me on finding something I was good at as I quickly became one of Pornhub's top 20 amateur pornography performers. It never occurred to me that making porn was bad. It gave people pleasure. It was far safer than prostitution. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was good at something. Slapping or hitting myself in specific places on my body were common requests. Hot candle wax and needles were other common requests. When I was making videos, I didn't feel pain. Only afterwards I would realize how much I'd hurt myself. I started doing things I'd never thought I would do, things that could cause permanent damage to my body. In my hunger for approval, I pushed past lines I'd promised myself I would not cross. One of the most disturbing requests I got, and one which shook me out of my compulsion, was when a regular patron asked me to stick a light bulb as far into my vagina as I could, and then hit myself in the belly to shatter it, then pull out the bloody shards. It makes me shudder to this day thinking about it, and that I considered doing it. I realized these men didn't like me. They liked what I did for them. I no longer felt special and valued. I felt used. I felt scared. I felt ashamed. And most of all, I felt replaceable. I realized I was just a body. Porn reduces women to replaceable sexual objects. Another one from the US, age group 25 to 34. Most of my long-term adult relationships involve porn use behind my back. I don't trust anyone. I assume all men, and even some women, are disgusting people on the inside. I can't laugh at jokes. A girl who once dreamed of marrying my soulmate no longer believes she can ever be with anyone again. I have consistently been lied to, and even remember seeing my own father have a disgusting collection of porn. I've been held to unrealistic standards and have no self-confidence in my physical self. I'm exposed to inappropriate comments whenever a man feels comfortable. Porn is worsening the world and it breaks my heart. And finally, another one from the US, age group 18 to 24. I was sexually abused at the age of 5, so this has triggered being hypersexual from a young age. As a result, I would fall victim to sexually suggestive content on YouTube, specifically from channels that were made for children. This then led to my porn addiction at the age of 11, when looking for porn on YouTube wasn't enough anymore. Since then, I've been addicted. It has gotten very bad during the ages of 12 to 14, and around 15, I began talking to predatory men on and offline. It settled down once I turned 19, where I finally quit sexting. But the porn addiction is extremely hard to get rid of. I've tried online communities seeking help through methods to quit, and also doing inner work, but I've never fully been able to shake it off. It's never as severe as it was when I was younger, but I'd say I'd relapse 1 to 2 times a week. There are so many more stories like those. Women whose self-image is destroyed from porn being normalized. Women whose intimacy is damaged from either their own or more frequently their partner's use. Women who were coerced in participation through promises of love and appreciation. Women whose every relationship comes second to her partner's sexual fantasy. Women who see their only worth as how well they perform as a desirable pornified object. Recently in the US, a few states have passed age verification legislation on porn sites, which has culminated in the Supreme Court case Free Speech Coalition versus Paxton, arguing on whether the Texas law requiring an age verification process to access pornographic content violates the First Amendment. The case has been argued, but a decision has yet to be reached. In addition, activist Lila McElwaite has exposed Pornhub for their lax vetting practices, showing their hosting of child pornography and allowing creators to upload their own videos of abusing children. What she exposed forced the company to delete 80% of their entire website, amounting to 10.6 million videos and over 30 million images. McElwaite's goals are to stop sex trafficking of minors and adults. While she states porn is protected speech, the goals of her company, Trafficking Hub, is to implement rigid consent guidelines that pornography must follow for the protection of those being filmed. In both those cases, the pornography industry has openly showed their disregard for safeguarding in favor of monetary gain. Paired with the prevalence of the stories we collect from women, we hope to show how much destruction pornography leaves in its wake just by being normalized. And hopefully, with all these stories, we will show that the destruction is counterintuitive for the freedom of speech, given the weight of violence it is normalized against women. Our survey will remain open until the end of March. We urge all attendees and viewers to share their own stories and invite others to as well. I have a link to the survey as well that we will be sharing. Thank you all for listening.
And with that, we will turn to the brilliant Kate Harris, who will tell us all about the LGB Alliance. And then Kate and I will have a little chat about whatever Kate wants to chat about. So take it away, Kate.
Even though it seems quite impossible to me, it is possible that some of you don't know what LGB Alliance is. So I'm going to tell you. It is an organization that was started by 2 lesbians, Bev Jackson and me, in 2019. As Cara said in the introduction, I was heavily involved with Stonewall, which is Europe's largest, used to be, gay rights organization. And I did an awful lot of work to encourage lesbians to get involved in Stonewall. It was, like many gay organizations, dominated by men who had more money, more resources, more confidence, more everything. But I was really, really very keen for lesbians to start standing up for our rights and being heard. When Stonewall decided to completely switch from promotion of gay rights to promoting gender identity ideology in 2015, I began to write to the chief executive at the time, who was Ruth Hunt, and then when she left, to the chair of the Board of Trustees, Jan Gooding, simply asking for dialogue. There is something going on here. you are denying reality, you are telling lies, this is dangerous. We must have an acceptance that there are different opinions, that free speech is the fundamental foundation of a free society. And at that time, Stonewall's key rule was no debate. So I spent 3 years, along with other former trustees of Stonewall, talking to Stonewall to try to get a dialogue going. We hosted a petition, 10,000 signatures asking Stonewall to talk. We wrote letters to the Times. In the end, it became obvious that nothing was going to change. And I kept waiting for somebody else to do something, but they didn't. So I was introduced to Bev Jackson fortuitously. I had been working previously with former trustees and other interested parties, but nobody really was pushing this forward. So over a period of 6 months, we phoned everybody we could think of who might be interested in this. We knew to be successful, we needed to do something that was for gays, lesbians, bisexuals, and we modeled ourselves on Stonewall as it was when it was a gay rights organization. And the rest is pretty much history. Alison Bailey, if any of you haven't heard of her, please Google her. She's a barrister who's still involved in legal proceedings against Stonewall herself. And she tweeted on the night of our first meeting at which we were going to plan what to do. She tweeted, "Watch out, world, LGB Alliance is here." And all hell broke loose. And we weren't ready for anything. We hadn't said a word in public. We hadn't issued a press statement. We hadn't finalized our mission statement. The meeting that we'd had with 70 invitees, Sheila was there, various other people on the call, I'm sure, were there. At that meeting, we were really just talking about, okay, what should we do? Who's going to run this? Who's going to write the mission statement? What are we going to do? One thing we did do at that meeting, because we decided we were about actions, not words. One thing we did do at that meeting was we wrote a letter to the Equality and Human Rights Commission in the UK. I might come back to that later. I don't want to spend too much time on it now, but suffice to say, we're still waiting for their full response 5 years later, because what we've requested is a formal inquiry under section, I think it's section 16 of the Equality Act, into Stonewall and the way that they have corrupted every level of British society and institutions such as the BBC, the police, etc. So that is still going, and I'm happy to talk about that later on. Anyway, at that meeting, it was preparatory. It wasn't a formal launch, but suddenly we were swamped. We did have a Twitter account, and we had about 50-50, I think, messages telling us that we were hateful bigots who deserved to die, or thank goodness somebody's doing something at last. One of the most damaging things was that a revolting person whose name escapes me momentarily, I'm sure it'll come back to me, a man who had a large following of activists, tweeted something along the lines of, "LGB Alliance is a hate group, pass it on." This was before we had said anything. So that went viral, and that has damaged us from that day until now. LGB Alliance is a hate group. So that happened, but also we were overwhelmed by people who thanked us, and this was global, wanted to say thank you from every continent. So it was a bit of a baptism of fire. Anyway, nobody picked it up. So Bev and I continued from that day on, and 2 years, it was absolute hell every single day, 24/7, wondering what on earth was going to happen next, who was going to do what should we say, what is our response, who are we going to, and of course, lots and lots of criticism came from our own side. People are very suspicious, very sensitive. We all are, because we're going through such a hideous time. And we found the attacks from people on our own side harder to bear. And we just had to say, please judge us by our actions. We cannot perform miracles overnight. You know, this has come from nothing. We have no money, we have no structure, we have nothing. So give us a break, give us time to breathe. And eventually, I think we were quite right. Our first campaign was against self-ID in Scotland. We were the only organisation that stood up and said, we're against this legislation to reform the gender recognition bill in Scotland. I was very clever. I'm going to blow my own trumpet here. I was the only person who said, actually, don't worry, this will never get through. And we will ensure it does not get through. And we did ensure it didn't get through, along with the women who wouldn't wished. I mean, the women who wouldn't wished are all the women in Scotland and around the world who adopted that. We will not accept this. And we fought and fought and fought. And I'm delighted to say that the history of what happened in Scotland is very well known to all of us. And farewell, Nicola Sturgeon. Off you go with Val McDermott, but leave us alone and leave children alone. So that's a brief intro for anybody who doesn't really know what we were about. We realized very quickly we had to become a registered company, an official registered charity, and that's what we did. So it's a very different organization now. It exists. We have 3 full-time members of staff. We have Kate Barker, we have Kerry Mullin, we have Stephen Young, we have a board of trustees, we have a wonderful chair, Eileen Gallagher, OBE. I'd be amazed if there weren't a number of fans watching this, fans of a program called Bad Girls. One of my favorite programs of all time. Eileen is responsible for that. I'm sure that's why she got her OBE. Anyway, that's an aside. But what I want to do is to talk to you about what LGB Alliance has been doing in the last year, and also what is planned for 2025. What I must emphasize is that this is the work, particularly of our Chief Executive, Kate Barker, day to day with the team, with Kerry and Stephen, and with a huge group of volunteers. We would be nothing without our supporters and volunteers. So after self-ID, the second campaign that we took on was to ban puberty blockers. I remember very early on, we had a session, sort of, what do they call it? Brainstorming, blue skying. What are your dreams? Put up here, what is your #1 dream? We said, close the Tavistock clinic and ban puberty blockers. Done. So, I mean, the fact that there are other gender identity clinics around the country is a worry. The fact that there are former clinicians from the Tavistock staffing some of these clinics is a worry. The fact that there is a bloke called Dr. Michael Brady, who's the LGBT representative in the NHS, is a worry. So there's plenty of work to do. We know the NHS is still deeply, deeply flawed with gender identity ideology. However, banning puberty blockers in the UK and the Cass Review has had a global impact, and that is huge. We were directly involved, Kate Barker and Eileen Gallagher were directly involved in influencing the Minister Victoria Atkins in the last days of the Tory government to ensure that she snuck through in the dying days of the last government ban on private prescription of puberty blockers. So thank you to Victoria Atkins for that. As far as Wes Streeting is concerned, of course, we're delighted that he's banned NHS prescriptions for under 18s. We are lobbying him on the puberty blocker trial, which clearly is insane, utterly insane. Have a look at the letter. If you don't follow LGB Alliance on X, I encourage you to. That's where the team posts our important news items, and you can see the letter that was written recently to explain to Wes why the puberty blocker trial must not go ahead. We have 9,000 children already who've been through the Tavistock, the Gender Identity Services. Where are their records? That is what we should be looking at. not putting new children on medication that Hilary Cass has said very clearly has no evidential basis for its usage at all. One of the key points for us about puberty blockers is that this is transing away the gay. If there is anybody on this call who is not aware of this, please, again, go to our X feed and look at the post from 2 days ago, I think. Jamie Reed Jamie Reed is an absolutely brilliant woman in the way that she articulates what's happened. And if you watch her giving evidence in Wisconsin a few days ago, where she describes the first cohort of children who were in what's become known as the Dutch Protocol. And I'm actually not going to tell you what Jamie says. Go and read it. Go and listen to her. Because fundamentally, this is an experiment on gay and lesbian kids. It is utterly reprehensible. It always has been utterly reprehensible. We will not allow it to continue. We will not allow this disgraceful homophobia to continue, and to very vulnerable children, most at risk. We're also campaigning, obviously, supporting Kira Bell with her campaign to ban cross-sex hormone prescriptions and surgery on the NHS. Utterly indefensible. Secondly, so that's a big campaign for us that will continue. We will not take our focus off this, because we know that had it been us, I would have done it, definitely, and we're not going to allow this horror to continue. So, slightly lighter, we have friends groups. Mrs. Grumpy, i.e. me, thought, what's this friends groups nonsense? Well, actually, it turns out to have been a brilliant idea. Kate Barker's, I think. We've got 36 Friends of LGB Alliance groups running from the Isle of Skye to Cornwall. And one of the features that we are encouraging is for there to be more of these, and also for us to hold more of what has been named Big Nights Out. The next big night out is Saturday, the 12th of April, and it's in Glasgow. Please go. If you're interested in the Friends group, have a look on LGB Alliance website. It's just a way. Do you remember when you sort of first heard about gender identity ideology and you thought, hang on a minute, am I the only mad one, or am I the only sane one? Go to a Friends group and you'll find other people who are also sane, which is needed. Thirdly, we get involved, obviously, in legal challenges. We were all in court thanks to Mermaids and the delightful Jolyon Morm, also Stonewall, although they pulled out at an early stage. But we had to stand up in court, as you may remember, and explain to the judges that lesbians don't have penises. We also had to stand up for our right to exist as a charity, which was what the case was about. They did not want to have a gay rights charity exist in the 21st century in the United Kingdom. That was the goal. It is still the goal. We are still under attack every day. And please, if you think, well, LGB Alliance, I don't know, I'm not that bothered, think about it. Would you be bothered if we weren't here? Because we are constantly aware of how fragile our existence is. So we encourage you to support us in whatever way you can, whether it's by following us on X. Become a core supporter. That's the most important thing you can do. Pay us whatever amount you like, but pay it to us every single month, because that allows us to budget for these projects that are coming up. Anyway, the latest legal challenge is actually at the UK Supreme Court. So I love the fact that, we had we had the US Supreme Court and we have the UK Supreme Court. These issues are all going to the highest level. And our Supreme Court challenge is, what is a woman? What's so fabulous is that Scottish lesbians joined with the Lesbian Project and LGB Alliance with our wonderful barrister, Karen Monaghan. We were called the Lesbian Interveners, which we thought was probably quite a good name for a film or a band. We're waiting for the judgment, but for those of you who watched it on YouTube, or if you haven't watched it, I recommend you watch it. The most interesting parts of the whole hearing were when counsel for the Scottish government explained that a man who gets a gender recognition certificate becomes a lesbian. And there was silence in the court, and the looks on the faces of the judges and the questions. Are you saying that a man can get a certificate, a piece of paper, and he thereby becomes a lesbian if he's attracted to women? And the answer is yes, that is the view of the Scottish government. So if you have a dull afternoon, watch it and look at the judges' faces. This is the insane world we live in. Now, there's a couple of possible outcomes. They may say, yeah, that's right, they are. That's all you need. And the law says that they are women and they are lesbians. But if they do, then clearly the whole thing has got to go back to Parliament, questions over the Gender Recognition Act, questions over the Equality Act, we don't know. But we're very pleased to have intervened in that. We think the intervention was key because it's more dramatic than just saying a man can become a woman. It's much more dramatic to say you now qualify as a lesbian, and lesbians can't exclude you from clubs, societies, anything. We're also involved in a case in the Czech Republic, which is two gay men with an adopted child. One is British, one is Czech, and the adoption is not recognized in the Czech Republic, and we believe it should be. So that's another legal challenge that we're involved with. Another brainwave has come up from the team, Business Forum, LGB Alliance Business Forum. If anybody on this call is interested, is in business of any kind, or basically if you have a job, have a look at Business Forum. It's got its own website. Just type in LGB Alliance Business Forum. It's a whole new angle for us, and it's really important because we know from however many legal challenges there have been, that Stonewall has been giving illegal information to employers for a number of years because their reading of the Equality Act is that gender identity is a protected characteristic. And from that, which is untrue, they have misled employers across the UK. And constantly, in case after case, we see Stonewall misinformed. You know, it started with Aqua Reindorf's case at the University of Essex, I think the most recent one. It wasn't the Fife one, I can't remember which one it was, but anyway. The Business Forum is basically an antidote to what used to be a brilliant scheme called Stonewall Diversity Champions, which held the Workplace Equality Index, which was designed to help employers navigate their way through the Equality Act correctly. As soon as Stonewall changed the interpretation of the Equality Act, it's become an absolute menace, and which is why so many workplaces have put in mixed loos, etc., etc., etc. So the Business Forum is actually perfectly timed as well because of what's happening in the US and the spotlight on does DEI enhance the experience of employers and employees, or what is happening. So there's a whole big discussion going on, and we've had good coverage in some of the press about the Business Forum, which is great. This is the thing that we've always said, Bev and I said from the beginning, this is a global struggle. This is not a struggle that you can fight country by country. We stand or fall together. You're a lesbian whether you're in Taiwan, Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Colombia. We are the same wherever we live, and we deserve the same. We are lesbians wherever we are gay men, and we must work together. So basically what happened was that despite myths that were propagated that Beverly Jackson was sitting in a basement flat in Amsterdam with 12 different computers with different IP addresses, pretending to be 12 different LGB alliances. That's what the opposition said was happening. But what was actually happening was that groups were forming around the world without us. They aren't all called LGB Alliance. Some of them have different names. Some of them have started and stopped. Some of them have, had a real struggle. And we know how hard it is. We're very, very, very lucky in the UK because LGB Alliance exists within a whole group of different groups that all want to fight against gender identity ideology. Anyway, what we're going to do, what we are in the process of doing, is putting together a kind of federation. We have to fight ILGA, which is the single voice for lesbian, gay, bisexual, TQIA+, at global level. We have to disrupt the narrative. When we formed LGB Alliance in this country, we disrupted the narrative here just by our name, not by actually saying anything. So internationally, we will be called LGB International, and we will build up a federation of which LGB Alliance will be, at UK will be one member, but there will be a board representing the different countries around the world. And gradually, if we can get sufficient support, we will hope to get a secretariat. We will hope to be present at United Nations events, World Health Organization events, and we will speak up for gays, lesbians, and bisexuals around the world. The 3 top priorities for 2025 are: be the preeminent lesbian, gay, and bisexual rights charity in the United Kingdom. Stonewall is going through a bit of a phase at the moment. It didn't help them to be, when it was made clear that they'd been funded by the State Department for a few £100,000, having accused us of being in receipt of gazillions of dollars from the US. It did enable us to have a rare smile. But they are cutting back on their staff. They have somebody more sensible in charge. Who knows? Who knows what their future is? But we have always tried to act within the law. We represent the law as it is, not as we would like it to be. And we continue to work with politicians and government as effectively as we can to campaign on what we believe is important. So we've got a lot more to do because we're still not allowed on the BBC, not allowed on any public channel except for GB News. We're very rarely reported. We have a very low profile. We have hardly any money. But that is one of our priorities. The other one is what we mentioned before, the ban on cross-sex hormones and surgery, phalloplasty, mastectomies on the National Health Service. Utterly disgraceful, utterly against everything that the NHS was formed for. Conversion therapy ban, our contacts in the Labour Party say there is zero appetite for it. Not surprisingly, because it's a load of absolutely unnecessary nonsense. However, you have got Angela Eagle and various people like that who will continue to try and push for something like that. Big campaign coming up for us, adoption and fostering. I don't know if you knew this, UK people. I didn't know this. There are 100,000 children in care in the United Kingdom. There are no barriers at all for gays, lesbians, and bisexuals to adopt children, none, or foster them. So this is a big campaign coming up for us It will coincide with what we know Ruth Hunt is doing. This is the former chief exec of Stonewall, who now sits very nicely in the House of Lords. Her favourite issue now is encouraging commercial surrogacy. We think Stonewall will also play in that awful area. Meantime, we will take what we consider to be the high ground and the right thing to do, which is to encourage fostering and adoption in a responsible way. We're continuing, we're sort of repeating here, but we're continuing, we want more attention on a total ban on any medicalization of young people likely to grow up to be lesbian, gay, and bisexual. And the third campaign may surprise some of you, but we've been getting more and more reports informally, not formally yet. We've got to do more research about chemsex and deaths, especially of young gay men who maybe have to be drugged out of their brains because of all the homophobia that's going on around them. But this is something that we're going to start looking into. The charities that used to look after young gay men and would have taken care of this seem to have sort of given up on all of it. So that's our third campaign. So do have a look at our website. Do come to our conference. Do please, if you can, become a core supporter if you're not already. The advantage of the core supporter from your point of view is that you get advance notice of whatever is coming up, plus news flashes if anything interesting happens. And for us, as I said, the advantage is that it enables us to operate in a planned way rather than lurching from one thing to another. So I just want to thank everybody who already does support us. I know so many of you do. And you know, it's tough for all of us. And without you, we would have gone home a long time ago.
I will turn it over to Jo to talk about a piece that she recently wrote about who's in love with gender.
I'm going to tell you about Judith Butler's new book. So Judith Butler's new book, Who's Afraid of Gender, was published in February 2025. And it's a queer theory manifesto, which suggests that for people that she calls anti-gender activists, gender is a phantasm. And by that she means a ghostly conglomeration of everything the conservatives, the religious, the patriarchs, the racists, and indeed the gender critical and radical feminists. So she puts us all together, that we fear and want to destroy gender. And what her thesis in her book is that gender has become a sort of ghostly amalgam of many, many things that we fear. Now, anyone who's read Judith Butler knows this is a typical sort of thing to just make up some idea and it all be very, very sort of unmaterial and moving and postmodern. Anyway, she says anti-gender actors want to restore a racist, patriarchal, religious order. And it's a mistake that radical and gender critical feminists don't join with the LGBTQI+ to fight them. And that's her main thing, is she's saying we shouldn't be afraid of gender and everybody who's progressive should like gender, as she does. And the most progressive thing to do is to fight the right, and we should all join together to fight it. And that radical and gender critical feminists are mistaken. So the first section of the book, she attacks the religious and the conservatives, and much of it, I would agree with it. So she writes, the idealized past can be found in the anti-gender ideologies movement's call to restore a patriarchal order for family, marriage, and kinship, including proscriptions on reproductive freedoms, gender self-determination, and healthcare for LGBTQI plus people. So she's right that the anti-gender, the right, want to restore the patriarchal order, but then she is joining on to that, that the progressive things that they're trying to destroy are gender self-determination, etc. She's anti-racist, post-colonial, environmentally conscious, and she attacks the right on these issues. But like adding TQI plus onto the LGB, she takes many of the good bits of feminism and adds on some anti-safeguarding, anti-women bits, and then she vilifies the original feminists. She attacks the right and then adds in an attack on gender critical and radical feminists. So, in an example, she criticizes many Christians for only believing in the Bible. And she says the anti-gender advocates are largely committed to not reading critically because they imagine that reading would expose them or subjugate them to a doctrine to which they have from the start levied objections. She then segues into an attack straight away on gender critical feminists and says to be gender critical is thus a misnomer deployed by some feminists who make implicit or explicit alliances with the right-wing opposition to gender. And then she says their views are emphatically objectionable, not only because they reduce gender to a single caricatured version of a complex reality, but also because they misunderstand what critical entails. So it's really hard to read, as shown here, because she repeatedly misrepresents us. Just pretty much many of the sentences are inaccurate in our view, or in my view. And unfortunately, this is where most of the trans rights activists are getting their information from. So this new book, I think, is going to be read very widely by trans rights activists, and a lot of her discourse we will hear if we're talking to trans rights activists. This will be the new line for a year or so, or for a while. She never acknowledges that radical feminists refuse gender because it's a crucial way that we are oppressed. We say that females are forced or groomed into performing gender, sex roles like being kind or doing unpaid work or wearing high heels. We're not afraid of the complexity of gender or reading about it. It's the sexism in gender that we hate. We're not afraid of gender, we hate it. So we want to abolish it. So it's really inaccurate to say that we're scared of it. But Butler loves gender, which she sees as a dynamic location for revolutionary change. Sex, which she says is assigned at birth, is in complex interplay with gender, she says. So this is Butler again, to refuse gender is sadly to refuse to encounter that complexity, to refuse, in other words, to let one's thinking be transformed by the complexity that one finds in contemporary life across the world. So she's saying we're simplistic and we don't have this dynamic view. The message is that gender is part of a wider progressive liberation struggle, and to be afraid of it is misguided fear. Her title, Who's Afraid of Gender, and her thesis that gender has become a phantasm. Her title, Who's Afraid of Gender, and her thesis that gender has become a phantasm, like a spectre haunting Europe, suggests that we are misguided to be wary of gender. But actually, we're very sensible to worry about gender. The Three Little Pigs, I mean, this doesn't show the Three Little Pigs, but it's got some goats. It's got the 7 billy goats graph. The Three Little Pigs were justifiably scared of the wolf who wanted to blow their houses down and eat them, and cheered each other on, sort of encouraged each other by saying, who's afraid of the big bad wolf? And her title, Who's Afraid of Gender, is very revealing, because actually it's reminding us of the dangers wolves actually pose to pigs, or in the picture, goats. And in our case, men to women and children, whether they're in sheep's or women's clothes or not. Butler criticizes conservatives as having old-fashioned, self-satisfied views about gender, but presents them nevertheless as viewing themselves and the world through a gender lens. So we know that in her book, she's talking to the trans rights activists. She's sort of trying to give them stories and understanding of the world, which fits their worldview that they are part of a wider progressive movement. And so and because she's very, very widely read and very supported, it's a real worry that she's saying everybody thinks like this. Now, what she says is some people like to think of their own gender as not only natural, but universal. I'm a man in the same way that everyone else is, and nature makes it so. And many people don't believe in gender, but actually she's sort of accurate because the right wing do believe that women should be women and men should be men, or women should be feminine and men should be masculine. So a lot of what she says, some sentences are actually very accurate, and she's describing the right wing, who are really oppressive. And so you can see why she's attractive to many people. She presents gender as a form of freedom, a movement, or a prison. And she writes, you can do gender on the street, celebrating with others the body you inhabit, or find that others have gendered you before you even enter the space. To inhabit a gender is to live out a certain historical complexity that has become possible for the lives we live now. It's attractive because her argument makes the personal breaking of gender roles into a political action to overthrow lots of interconnected oppressions. She talks about them very, really thoroughly in the book, and talks about the many, many struggles that progressive people are working on. So radical feminists also make the argument that the personal is political and rejection of sex role stereotypes is good. But the difference is that we don't suggest that wearing clothes of the opposite sex actually changes our sex. So Butler glorifies gender as a choice that we can do. She makes gender a thing, a place, a promised land in glorious manifestations. It's freedom. She suggests. She doesn't investigate what's happening in women's prison cells, the girls' changing rooms, gender affirmation clinics, LGBTQ plus youth clubs and rape relief centres. Just not a word is said about these things. Her description of her beloved gender is also revealing, though. She sort of prepares her followers for some bad things that are going to happen. So she says, gender comes along with vulnerability, penetrability, agency, dependency, illness, social recognition, basic requirements, shame, passion, sexuality, and variable conditions of life and aliveness. Which I mean, if you're a young person trying to work out what on earth's going on, it is quite worrying to think, okay, well, I need to prepare myself for penetrability, particularly for lesbians, but for everybody, really. Butler attacks the word sex in a variety of ways, but I'm going to tell you about two of them. And she muddles the meaning of sex repeatedly with gender and gender with sex. So they're not fixed words, they're amorphous. She says that it is not a fact. So sex isn't a fact, and it's dripping with sexist expectations. So she writes, many people refer to sex as if it's an obvious fact based on observation, and worry that academics have needlessly obfuscated plain matters. Yeah. Consider, however, that sex assignment is not simply an announcement of the sex that an infant is perceived to be. It also communicates a set of adult desires and expectations. And it's true that many sexist conservatives want to impose desires and expectations, which we would call gender, on sex, along with sex, and do. But to make out that everyone who believes sex is a fact does that is willful ignorance. Feminists have been fighting sexist stereotypes for centuries. She writes, sex assignment is not a simple description of anatomical facts, but a way of imagining what they will mean or should mean. So because many people have sexist views, she thinks we should get rid of sex. She doesn't mention all the problems, one of which is if we don't have sex disaggregated statistics, women-only shelters, we're going to find it difficult to describe oppression and our lack of power. She then goes on. So at the beginning, she attacks mostly the right and to a little bit the feminists. But then she goes on to, in the middle of the book, she says she's going to consider British debates on the matter of sex, paying close attention to the phantasmatic anxieties found in the argumentation of trans-exclusionary feminists such as J.K. Rowling, the Sex Matters organisation, and the views of Kathleen Stock and the New Zealand, this is what she says, she's from New Zealand, scholar Holly Lawford-Smith. So these are the four people that she, or group, people and group that she attacks. So she says Lawford-Smith's reference to radical feminist Andrea Dworkin undermines the whole of the feminist anti-gender argument, because Dworkin thought sex was a spectrum, and quotes Dworkin, "We are clearly a multi-sex species which has had its sexuality spread along a vast continuum where the elements called male and female are not discrete." And so as far as I know, that's accurate. And so it does, to some extent, undermine our use of Dworkin as part of our argumentation. Although I don't think any of us are really using her as the argument at the moment. But it is true that Lawford-Smith did in her book. Lawford-Smith's reference to Catherine McKinnon is also undermining, says Butler, because McKinnon thought it wasn't necessary to define women, and anyone who's treated as a woman should count. And then Butler, in this section, goes on to dismiss Lawford-Smith's defence of single-issue concern for women's rights, which she did, and says that that's not in line with what most feminists who are intersectional, who think we shouldn't actually prioritise women's rights. And to be honest, I think she's quite sort of accurate, and she's picked apart. She's done a really successful attack on Lawford-Smith's book, which is a shame, because, you know, not everything that Butler's saying is completely inaccurate. And it could even be that most feminists are intersectional, although, you know, I think Lawford-Smith's right to say we should be able to have a single issue concern for women's rights. So Butler also criticised J.K. Rowling for writing, "If sex isn't real, there's no same-sex attraction. If sex isn't real, the lived reality of women globally is erased." And Butler counters, "If sex is legally assigned and registered, it can be reassigned and re-registered." And can be reassigned and re-registered. Can we not conclude that the reality of sex has changed, and that change is now part of our historical reality? Sex can be both real and mutable, changeable. Unless we believe that the truth is always immutable and never historical, a proposition that would once again ally Rowling with the papacy. It's really, the whole thing is so irritating. Now, because we're running out of time, I am going to jump to the bottom of my piece and just do the last couple of paragraphs. There's about a page I haven't read out, but you can look at this on Substack if you're interested. So in her attack on feminists who oppose gender identity ideology, Butler does not mention actual radical feminists, most notably Sheila Jeffreys and Cara Dansky, who's here today, who don't fit the picture she's painting. I'd like to see Butler's answer to Sheila Jeffreys' notion of woman face, for instance. I think if she's saying she disagrees with our position, she should actually unpack our position adequately. And she doesn't actually look at any of the radical feminist positions. She says that J.K. Rowling and Kathleen Stock are radical feminists, which is just not true. Neither does Butler mention Laura Lecuona, Julia Long, or Lauren Levy, who have all written very clearly on gender being a form of oppression, the problems with femininity, and the threats to lesbians if men can say they're women. And nor does she mention critiques of gender from the LGB groups, well, the main one being the LGB Alliance. So all of those are not mentioned in this new book, Who's Afraid of Gender? And it's, I think it's disingenuous and very unhelpful to us, because her audience will think that they have had an overview of how bad radical feminists are, and indeed gender critical feminists are, and how wrong we are. But she hasn't actually given us a chance to defend ourselves or laid out our arguments. She's actually misrepresented us. And yes, also my other point is she doesn't mention the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights, which has been signed by nearly 40,000 people, 543 organizations worldwide. So I would say, probably don't read it. It's quite annoying, and it goes against the conversation that with Cara and Kate just had about looking after ourselves and having a nice time. But it is it is interesting that she's come out with this book. I think it seems to me that she's really the mouthpiece at the moment, and she's making the most sort of coherent argument for the trans rights activists. So it's good to know what's being said, even though it's incredibly irritating. So there we are.